I consider the Castlevania anime to be an all-time great, a truly 10 out of 10 show for me, with Season 2 being genuinely flawless storytelling. Now, as a Castlevania fan, I was of course excited to see my beautiful baby boy Alucard. You see, I'm mainly a fan of the Metroidvania era of the series, Symphony of the Night and Aria of Sorrow being my all-time favorites. And I know I'm about to ruffle some feathers with this statement, but I have a pretty low opinion of the NES Castlevania games. I respect them for what they started, but I'm of the general opinion that they're overrated. Castlevania 3 I do consider to be the best of the NES trilogy, it being the only one I actually like, and thus giving it the incredibly prestigious label of middle-of-the-road platformer. So when I heard that Netflix would be adapting Castlevania 3, I thought that it was the right move, but wasn't super excited. I thought it would certainly do better to adapt this game than the first one, as it has a built-in supporting cast from the source material, it's chronologically first in the timeline, and it's still an NES classic, so you'll get the older nostalgia crowd. Mainly, I was excited to see Alucard and enjoy an edgy vampire show that isn't Hellsing Ultimate. I was curious on how they would handle adapting the two lesser-known companions you can get, Grant and Sypha. I was disappointed but unsurprised when they ignored Grant's existence entirely, which for some reason is a very common trend in Castlevania. The only time I've ever seen him referenced outside of Castlevania 3 is in Judgment. And yeah, that didn't go too well for him. I was extremely surprised to discover, however, they would adapt Sypha by making her the GOAT. I had presumed I would like Trevor if the show was going to be at all good. And Alucard only had to show up in his Symphony of the Night design for me to adore him with praise. I had never expected Sypha to become one of my favorite characters. Between our three main heroes, I think she could be best qualified as the heart of the group. At the very least, she comes across as the most human between them, having not been raised to fight monsters her whole life and actually being fully human in Alucard's case. Trevor and Alucard are two different shades of grumpy, edgy, sad boy. I love them, but I think the show needs someone like Sypha to be peppy and upbeat for contrast. A story can only handle so much angsty anime boy before I begin to feel like I'm watching an incredibly high-quality Linkin Park AMV. She's the emotional bridge that ultimately keeps our three-man band together. Making the girl protagonist the emotional core of the group is a decision that I feel can err on the side of misogyny. Oh wow, you made the girl character the emotional one because girls are emotional or some shit. Wow, you're breaking new ground with this one. I've never seen that done before, Shakespeare. I think Castlevania sidesteps this problem for three reasons. First, Sypha is not the only woman in the show. It actually passes the Bechdel test. The rest of the women we are given are very diverse, showing that Sypha is like this because that's just who she is, not because the writer doesn't know what else to do with a female character. Second, Castlevania operates using a three-man band, not the traditional five-man. Because there are less members of the group, they have to wear multiple hats. Sypha is the heart, but being the only true spellcaster, she is the de facto magic person. She and Trevor play hot potato with the collective brain cells between them, but I feel like Sypha is usually the one with them, meaning that she's pulling double duty as the brains as well as the heart. And number 3, the Katara solution. Sypha is simply so goddamn well written, I think it completely overrides any accusations of her being just the girl character. The Avatar comparison is apt, both because it did the same thing as point number 1 in having a diverse roster of feminine characters, and the fact that Sypha is functionally a bender. None of this static pointing a wand or reading from a book. Sypha uses hand movements and creative thinking to magic her opponents to death. It turns her magic into something that requires martial skill, akin to bending. I mean, look at this. She's having a sword fight here. That is a martial art. This, applied with the show's top-notch animation, makes her fight some of the most dynamic sorcery ever shown on screen. She has to move her whole body for momentum, giving weight to the forces she's manipulating. It's so much more visually engaging than the likes of Harry Potter with its stagnant spellcasting. Speaking of which, quick side tangent that I promise will be relevant later. So in Harry Potter, none of the fights in the movies could ever really hold up to the fights in the books. In the 7th book, when McGonagall fights Snape, they transfigure things back and forth at each other. Snape makes a snake, Minerva then transforms that into daggers to shoot out at him. It's really cool and creative. In the movie, it's just some wisps of energy. It's why the only really excellent fight in the movies is Dumbledore versus Voldemort. It captures what kind of creative and quick thinking you would need to actually fight as someone with this power set. The creative usage of manipulating matter found in the books is superior to the generic energy blasts found in the movies. It allows us to externally conceptualize what a good wizard actually is. I only know from the movie that Harry is apparently a good wizard because Hermione told me so.
You'll be okay, Harry. You're a great wizard.
This is where it all ties back to Best Girl Sypha, because that is her entire fighting style. We know Sypha is a dangerously clever magic user since we constantly get to see her outwit her opponents and come up with new ways of approaching obstacles. Trevor and Alucard are of course fine combatants in their own right, but they definitely look at combat in a much more hit things until they're dead angle. Sypha always gives the impression that she is a strategic combatant, having some of the more creative kills over the course of the series. What makes this system work is that there's little to no stat checking. What I mean is that when Sypha hits something with a fireball, it gets set on fire and dies like anything else. For the most part. I mean, there are scenarios like Dracula, but those scenarios I can forgive, especially considering it's motherfucking Dracula. This is something I think you could criticize Nocturne for, since they added a lot more power scaling to the magic system than previously existed, making the whole thing a lot more unclear. Now, I'm a shonen junkie, so although I am aware that Castlevania is not a shonen anime, I can't help but analyze the show through the shonen lens. What I mean by this is typically in shonen, a character's way of approaching battle synergizes with them as a character. Polnareff is an honorable man who believes in fighting on his own terms with his own strength in a good old-fashioned 1v1. So his stand is that of a knight with a rapier, the sword of a duelist. This mode of analysis can work with Castlevania, and when we do that, I think you arrive at some interesting conclusions. Magic in Castlevania has a lot more utility than just setting people on fire, as dope as that is. We can be on the nose about it, with Sypha literally lifting her friends up with her magic, or a bit more subtle, with Sypha being the one to light the way forward into the Belmont Hold. Her role as the utility-based combatant reflects her ability to support her two idiot man-children along their journey. When we look at the previously mentioned man-children through this lens, it gives us insight on how Sypha is able to actually connect with both of them. Trevor is the farthest from Sypha's fighting style. He is more of a typical martial fighter, oftentimes using fisticuffs and standard weaponry in conjunction with his magic whip. Alucard is magic adjacent, being half vampire. His existence is inherently magical, and he incorporates elements of magic into his own combat style. Flying, shapeshifting, and using a sentient floating sword, he's still capable of using fisticuffs and swordplay, but it's certainly a mix between martial skill and the arcane. Alucard may be the hybrid, both in blood and combat. However, it is Sypha that is the diplomat to Alucard and Trevor's bickering. Even though Sypha and Trevor are the furthest apart on the magic to non-magic spectrum, they are both still human. She's able to relate to and sympathize with their shared humanity. Although Alucard may not have that shared humanity, he can relate to Sypha through their connection to the mystic arts. They often have a much more analytical and polite conversation that is far more befitting of a learned noble that Alucard supposedly is. I mean, just look at how he describes Doll Sypha in Season 3.
You are a horrible, terrible person, and many other words for horrible and terrible because I know all the words because I'm smarter than everybody, and one day I will go back to live with my flippin' family in a cart which makes me better than everyone. You will all die in a fire, a big one.
It is her intellect, her knowledge of things that Alucard associates with her. And I don't think it's a coincidence that she is the one to find the solution in the Belmont Hold to bind Dracula's castle. She is their wizard, the one most educated and scholarly of the group. I'd also like to note that Trevor being Sypha's opposite correlates with them being a couple at the end. After all, it is common knowledge, opposites attract. In summary, Sypha's relationship to Alucard is more akin to a normal friendship. They share their life stories with each other, discuss mutual interests, and are generally sweet to one another. Whereas her relationship to Trevor is a lot of bickering and teasing like an old married couple. I've always found it intensely fascinating that she basically has to corral two representatives of opposing sides of the world. Alucard may be opposed to Dracula's grand plan, but he refers to vampires as his people. He still identifies with them on some level. Trevor being a human that specializes in killing supernatural creatures, and Alucard being a supernatural creature, obviously leads to conflict. So it's very fitting that a supernatural human is the one to quell them. Sypha's arc through the show is a lot less pronounced than Trevor or Alucard's, but she does have one. Sypha at the start of the show is a well-educated idealist who is inexperienced in the practical applications of being a hero. Trevor did need to save her from that Cyclops, if you recall. She's a nerd. She has a lot of information locked up in that brain, but hasn't gone out and seen the world. She's traveled, but always with her family, and I think that left her a bit sheltered, despite physically having been around. Sypha's insular upbringing with a proper family gave her a good foundation, so she's able to lock in the correct position of maybe I should be using my abilities to stop the extinction of the human species. She's able to come to this conclusion before even our resident monster slayer. Being the most emotionally stable of the group, she doesn't really have a whole lot of room to improve, but she does grow. It's the incredibly compelling and classic story of someone who doesn't swear into someone that says, okay, obviously I'm doing a bit, however, unironically, the cursing is an integral part of Sypha's arc. Sypha goes from an essentially prim and proper nerd to a rugged, battle-hardened adventurer. By the beginning of the 4th season, even when battling a group of powerful night creatures, she's still bantering with Trevor, because they've just done this too many times for this instance to be any different from the rest. It's all consistent with her characterization as a bookworm as well. Sypha is ecstatic with learning and seeing new things. Belnadas and Belmont was her idea after all. There is very evidently a change between the girl sad to see her family leaving in a wagon and the wandering hero she becomes. I also love that the choice to keep going with Belmont is an extension of her intellect. Her emotional intellect. Sypha realizes that slaying monsters and doing good for the world is making Trevor and her better people. It's who they are, something they were born to be doing. Understanding your emotions and the emotions of others is a feat of intelligence, which is why Sypha, the smartest person in the show, is so goddamn good at it. Despite having a lot of love for the character, I sadly feel like I have comparatively less to say about her than her two companions. She's a wonderful character who I never get tired of seeing on screen, but Sypha is undoubtedly the most stagnant in terms of development. This is fine, not every character needs a life-altering series of events that fundamentally changes them at their core. Sometimes people just need to be stronger and wiser than they were before they left home. There's a lot to cover in her relationship with Trevor. I feel they sort of have a book smarts versus street smarts dynamic that makes the pair a joy to watch. But I ultimately feel their relationship serves to change Trevor more than it does Sypha, so I want to cover that in a dedicated Trevor video. Sypha was a hidden gem of a character I was not expecting to fall in love with. The way she utilizes magic has become my standard for visually engaging magic systems. Witty, funny, and a bubbly personality, she absolutely earns her place as one of our 3 protagonists. Overall, one of my favorite characters in the show, but not my absolute favorite. Join me next time where we'll be covering the Lancer and Muscle, Alucard.